We're going to do two different things, sort of, with this parsha. It's Parshat Chaye Sarah. What's the number one question that people ask about Chaye Sarah? That's right. That's exactly right. So it's about Sarah's death. It starts off with her death. We're going to look at that verse in just a moment. So why is it called the life of Sarah? That's the most famous question. We're not going to talk about that. But I just wanted you to all get it out of your system.
So
well, we are going to...
Two words, that's why we call it.
What, sorry, what?
We call it Chaye Sarah because those are the first two words, and the name of the parsha is almost always based on the first two words of the parsha.
I'm going to be a nasty... There's a joke in Maine which answers the question.
Okay, go ahead.
Maine, you ask a guy, have you lived in Maine all your life? He said, not yet.
Okay, great. That's a good joke.
You only live
Yeah.
whole life at the end?
It's a good joke, especially when you have to explain it. Okay. So what we are going to talk about is what happens when Sarah dies and why it's such a remarkable feat, but also mitzvah for us to bring into our own lives. So, are we all with me? Okay, there's a lot of things happening in this room right now. Okay. So we're going to talk about what happens after she dies, and we're also going to talk about how that helps us with the mitzvah of burial, and also the mitzvah of Hevra Kadisha, though that is not explicitly discussed in this parsha. And just as a plug, actually two things very quickly. There's a conference happening tomorrow at Ramah for lots of people who are involved in Hevra Kadisha, and some of the members of our own Hevra Kadisha are there. Members of both Beth and Ikar are there, or will be there. It starts tomorrow. And I was having a meeting with one of the people who's running the program, and it's really it's a beautiful thing to remember that part of why Hevra Kadisha is so important to our people is because it's a life cycle. Right? We spend a lot of time planning baby namings and b'nai mitzvah, et cetera, et cetera. We don't spend as much time talking about the preparation for burial. We also spend a lot of time around funerals and shiva, of course, but we don't talk about that interim time. And it's actually extremely important, not only as a community, but also as individuals, I think. And the second thing that I'll say is that our Hevra Kadisha here at Temple Beth started because of the death of Baruch Link. Baruch was my teacher. Baruch was my teacher. Baruch died suddenly, and I was there with him before he was taken to the cemetery. And in that moment, I thought to myself, this is not just something for a rabbi to do, this is something for a whole community to do. And so too began the Hevra Kadisha. I mean, many, many, many months later, and unfortunately it did not exist for us to be the hands to do Tahara for Baruch. But it's a lovely tribute for me, but also a real lovely connection that I get to talk about this mitzvah on a weekend where we're remembering him so lovingly, because it really was an experience that I don't actually wish upon anyone except for if you're in the space of Hevra Kadisha. But to me, it was a holy experience to be by the side of my teacher and to be able to honor him in that way. So we're going to look at these verses and then some commentaries. I'll pass these around. I don't have one for everybody, so if you're not going to look at it, feel free to pass it along. I'll let you all figure out how to pass the rest of these. Okay. So I'm going to jump around just a little bit, mostly for time's sake, though there's a lot, obviously, in this parsha that we could discuss in terms of intricacies of burial and also the importance of it. What I want us to specifically, and don't read on, which now that I said that, you'll all read on, but what I want you to specifically focus on is what does Abraham do for Sarah, but also what's important of the experience around Sarah, because we're going to look later verses in Bereshit specifically as to how people in our tradition thought of burial and of the death and dying mitzvot as a communal practice, not just an individual one. Okay, so Sarah dies in Kiryat Arba, still a location, and it's now called Hevron. It says he Hevron. So Kiryat Arba is called Hevron. Be'eretz Canaan. Has anybody been to Hevron? Yeah, it's a difficult place to go to right now, though people still go. I know a person who was actually just there last week.
We were actually there in Israel when Chaya Sarah a couple of years ago.
Oh, really? Amazing. On the same parsha of Chaya Sarah? Wow, that's fabulous.
Everybody camps out and everything.
Yeah. So Marat HaMachpelah, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, which is the tomb that supposedly has all of our matriarchs and some matriarchs and some patriarchs is in Hebron, and you can still go and visit it. It's a contentious place. I'm not going to get into the reasons as to why. If you're interested, you can look it up. But people do go. And I went when I was in rabbinical school. I remember telling my family after I went, not before. But I did go. Okay, Vayavo Avraham lispo lesara veliv kota. In the Torah, and you can kind of see it here, the kaf of liv kota is small. I'm just pointing that out. There's lots of different drashot as to why, but it's a very beautiful thing to see that the word around crying is somehow distinct from the other words surrounding it. Lispod means to eulogize. We still use that word when we talk about a eulogy today. A hesped is a eulogy. So Abraham comes and he gives a eulogy for Sarah, and it says that he mourns her. So they're using the word eulogize and mourn synonymously, and he cries for her. Vayakam Avraham me'al pnei meto ve'daber et pnei chet le'mor. So Abraham rises from beside Sarah, right? So all of this is happening still before she's buried. So it's in a different order than we do it today, right? We don't eulogize until the person is about to be buried, usually in some kind of ceremony beforehand or at graveside. But in this case, because he was sitting with her doing shmirah, which is what we would call it today, he eulogizes her in that moment. And so this is the point where he then gets up and he speaks to the Hittites around him. And this part I'm just going to read in English. I'm a resident alien among you. Sell me a burial site among you that I may remove my dead for burial. So what's the most important part to him right now? Yeah, finding a place to bury her. And what's unique about how he asks? Well, interesting, great. So he says that he's a resident alien, which the commentators really do enjoy. That he uses the word ger v'toshav. What else? What's interesting here? Yeah, Rebecca.
Well, it might be an interpretation, but he doesn't have a place to bury.
Right. Right, so we would understand from this that because he's a ger v'toshav, that he might not actually have a place to bury her. The other piece that's interesting that yeah.
Which becomes a little bit interesting because afterwards he insists on paying,
Right.
on paying full price, in fact more than it's worth.
Good, exactly. So Rabbi Berenbaum, was reading into the text. I was reading the text, not reading into the text the way that the translation does. It says in English, sell me a burial site. It does not say that in the Hebrew. It says, give me. Later on, as Rabbi Berenbaum pointed out, he does make a point, and we're going to read this in a second. He does make a point of saying, I want to buy it. It's important to him that he own the land, not that he's just given it, right, for 1,000 reasons, right? You wouldn't want someone to say, well, it's not actually yours. I'm going to give it to somebody else or whatever. But also he wanted to feel like he was buying something for his beloved, right? He wanted to feel like he was taking care of her. Yeah, Ed.
Curiosity, just
Yeah.
the word when it said whale.
Yes.
There's no drash on that.
Leave kota.
That connotation and that really. that time, for a man to cry.
Oh, I see. I didn't look it up to be honest. There is a lot of drash around the little kaf in the word leave kota that has to do with the crying that he's doing. Our text doesn't seem to be so worried about men crying, which is actually a really beautiful thing. And there is, obviously this comes later in our texts of law, there's a law that you're supposed to, even if you can't cry for the person who has died, you're actually supposed to hire professional criers, right? That will cry for the dead, that it's actually a mitzvah for there to be wailing. So my guess is that even if there was some kind of connotation or societal norm around men crying, which I don't remember anywhere in the Torah coming across, that it would still not be a thing in this context.
Wait a second.
Yeah. Okay.
Professional wailers.
Yeah.
The fact is, I can be in total remorse without even crying.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I feel that I have to put on this display? Let's say I feel strongly, but I'm not a person that wails.
Yeah. That's why they would have professional wailers.
Display.
Yeah.
Why don't you trust me that? Yeah, I'm remorseful. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sad and all that, even though I'm not crying buckets of tears and stuff like that.
So the rabbis were less concerned about the emotional act of crying and more concerned about the mitzvah of, in some way, that brought kavod, that brought honor to the person who you were missing. So that's exactly why there were professional wailers, because if there was someone who did not feel the ability or need to wail, there should still be someone who was crying for that person. We're not going to focus on that though, so I'm going to keep going. Yeah.
In that same vein,
Yeah.
isn't that a Middle Eastern custom?
Mhm.
Not only amongst us, but amongst others as well.
100%. And my guess is, and Rabbi Berenbaum is a much better scholar on this than I am, my guess is it came from us. But yes, it is a custom that you see in Middle Eastern cultures, even to today, right? That it's something. And by the way, when we think about, just to go back to Ed's question of men crying, if you think back to the funerals that were had and are unfortunately now being had in great succession after October 7th, you see men and boys crying all the time very freely. And in that culture, it doesn't seem to be a problem, even though it very much is a culture that has a macho status around their men. But that doesn't seem to be an issue for at least Israelites and Jews when it comes to our text.
It's more an issue in American culture where
Correct.
we have
Right.
a tradition, you keep a stiff upper lip,
Yeah.
which doesn't allow for the full manifestation of
Correct.
emotions.
Right.
I just wanted to add one other thing.
Yeah, sure.
We learned from here that, and this is historical, a cemetery must be owned. It cannot be leased.
Right.
And therefore, the answer in virtually every question is, what is the first thing that Jews own
Yeah.
in a community? And
Right.
in a community, it's always the cemetery. We had in American history, it took us 150 years to be able to have a synagogue that we owned, but we owned the cemetery immediately.
Right. Yeah, and we're going to get that in this next verse here, in verse 9. So he's now saying, Abraham is saying, let him sell me the cave of Machpelah, right, which is in Hebron, that he owns, which is at the edge of his land. Let him sell it to me at the full price for a burial site in your midst, right? So to Rabbi Berenbaum's point, it at first says, give me a place to bury, and then it's very important to him that he sell it to him and that he own that spot, and that's how we get the necessity to own burial plots and therefore cemeteries in our tradition. Okay, we're going to keep going. Then Abraham bowed low before the land-owning citizens and spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the land-owning citizens, saying, if only you would hear me out, let me pay the price of the land, accept it from me that I may bury my dead there. I'm going to read the next piece in Hebrew. I just wanted you to see how this all worked out. He's begging to be able to pay. They want to just give it to him, but he's begging to pay for this grave, which, by the way, today, for those of you who have bought burial plots, or who are thinking to buy burial plots, everyone should at whatever age. They're extremely expensive. So, because it's real estate, right? And so when you think back to a time where it potentially was expensive then too, I have no idea because I have no concept of what money was like back then for Abraham, but it was so important to him that he not just be given it, but that rather he be able to pay for it. And by the way, that does not mean not being given assistance around the paying of it, but putting some money towards it so that it's not all coming from somebody else. Okay. Ve'acharei chen kvar Avraham et Sarah. So after all of this, he has a burial plot and he buries Sarah, his wife, Ishto. Arat sde hamachpela. Al Pnei Mamre hi Hevron be'eretz Canaan. That's just telling you where it is in the field of Machpelah. That's in Hebron. Okay. Rashi goes back to this question of what does it mean to be a ger v'toshav, and Rashi says that it's interesting that ger means stranger and toshav means settler, right? Not the political kind of settler that you're all thinking of now that I said that word, but someone who has settled somewhere, right? So we're all settlers in Los Angeles, right? So someone who is a stranger, or New York, Queens. Someone is a stranger, and someone is also someone who has settled. Those seem to be two very opposite things, right? Because when we think of strangers, we think of people, strangers to a land, we think of people who don't know the place, right? Strangers to a person might live in the same city, obviously. But a stranger to the land, you would think, okay, they don't live here because they're a stranger to the land. So what Rashi says is a stranger having come from another land, but he has settled down here amongst you, right? So what Rashi's reminding us is that you could be a stranger to us. We might not know you yet, but you do live here. This is also your land, and you've also settled your roots down here. So you're a ger, but you're also toshav, right? You're also someone who has settled, even if you're a stranger to people, which is a bizarre thing, but actually extremely common. Exactly. Like, I don't know everybody in Los Angeles, but I live in Los Angeles with them, right? So if we're all living in the same place, we're all settling down in the same location, but I might not know everybody. So, yeah.
It's sociologically very different in Los Angeles than in
Hebron.
In other places. In other words,
Okay.
let me give you a very interesting example. If you go to Baltimore, Maryland,
Yeah.
people ask you where your grandparents went to high school,
Okay.
and that defines your journey within Baltimore.
Uh-huh.
And a person who moves to Baltimore
Uh-huh.
is not a Baltimorean until they've been there for 2 generations.
Seems very elite.
No, there's a sense of rootedness
Sure.
in the community. I lived many years ago in New Hampshire.
Okay.
So one day I called home, and a strange woman answers the phone. And I said, who is this? And she introduced herself. Said, what are you doing in my home? She said, I was born in this home.
Oh.
My father was born in this home. My grandfather was born in this home. Who are you? In other words, possession,
Sure.
we were renters.
Right.
Possession, though, means the home had been in the family for 250 years, and they possessed the home.
Sure.
We were interlopers, so that tells you a little bit
Yeah.
about the sociology. Los Angeles, virtually everybody, with the exception of Alan and the like, everybody came from somewhere
And
to
me.
Los Angeles over a period of time, so
Right.
we don't have the concept. In rootedness
Yeah. Yeah.
means it's very clear that you can be a ger v'toshav.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point.
Only your being there doesn't exclude your strangeness until you've settled it for a long time.
Sure. That's a very good point. What I want us to look at next is this piece from two different places. One is when Avraham dies, and one is when Yishmael dies. As you can see, it's not in so many chapters. One is from chapter 25, verse 8, and one is from chapter 25, verse 17. I didn't give you the whole translation. I'm happy to translate if you want me to. But the reason I brought you these verses is because I want you to see a piece of each of these verses that comes from this idea of what Avraham does for Sarah. And it's the words Vayesef et el amav, So the idea that someone was gathered to their nation, to their people, to their family, it's really important to our faith, to our tradition, to our culture, that we be buried and that we be gathered to those who knew us and those who were close to us. And so that both has to do with burial, but it also has to do with Hevra Kadisha, because there are people who are hired to do Hevra Kadisha in the cemeteries, and they're wonderful. It's their job. It's what they do. But they may not know me or know you when it comes time for them to do Tahara for us. And so most communities have a Hevra Kadisha so that we are gathered around the people that we know to be able to do Tahara with our own hands for people who we cared for in life and now as they get ready to be buried in death. Sforno, you can turn the page. Sforno says that the reason why the Torah employs the term amav, his people, as in the plural, is that there are all kinds of different spiritual levels among the righteous souls. Not all attain the same level of righteousness while on earth, although all of them share the experience of enjoying eternal life. So even if you were a ger v'toshav, right? Even if you were a person who was not known or was not amongst kin, whatever that meant to you while you were living, it's still the responsibility of the community for you to feel like you are gathered amongst those who should care for you, even if they didn't know you, in death. Right? That there is something really powerful about, even in your eternal life, being surrounded by people who care for you, who or at least should care for you. We're going to look at a piece from Moed Katan, which is a tractate in the Talmud. I brought you a lot of English today because I didn't want to make this 5 pages, but if you wanted to look up the Aramaic and the Hebrew, you obviously can. This is one of the first tractates that I learned in rabbinical school, actually with Rabbi Dr. Gail Leibovitz, and it's a really powerful sugya that talks all about why we bury the way that we bury, and I'm just going to get to the punchline for time's sake. Originally, back in the day, the rabbis say in this part of the Talmud that depending on how wealthy you were, you got a certain type of burial and a certain type of shiva. But then Rabban Gamliel, which is why the institute was called the Gamliel Institute, Rabban Gamliel came and treated himself lightly and was brought out for burial in simple linen garments. Rabban Gamliel was a very well-known rabbi and probably had lots of money. So the fact that he was brought out for burial in linen simple garments, which now we call tachrichin, that's what we're all buried in. And thereafter the people followed his lead and were buried in linen garments. Said Rav Papa, nowadays all follow the practice of being clothed for burial, even in a coarse garment worth but a zuz, meaning a very, very small amount of money. What is this text teaching us? That once upon a time, everything was based on socioeconomic level, and then this really famous rabbi did this. What is it teaching us? Sorry, I don't actually know your name. What's your name? Eric. Nice to meet you.
So it means, the way that I interpret this is that death is the thing that equates all of us equally.
Yes, correct.
And I think by having the plain garments and the simple pine box,
Right.
again, it creates an equality amongst all of those who died.
Exactly.
You're the wealthiest man in the world. It's not gonna make it-
Correct.
not taking it with you.
Right. Right. What our rabbis are saying is exactly that it doesn't matter how much money you have. What's important is that you go into the ground with dignity. And that dignity for all of us means simplicity and the way that you came into the world. But then there's an added piece here, and I think that it's because of what Avraham teaches us with Sarah, which is you're supposed to have a funeral with people. It doesn't have to be hundreds of people, but you're supposed to be surrounded by people, right? During Hevra Kadisha, during a funeral, Shiva for those who are living after you've passed, right? That it's not about how you lived in life in terms of your means. It's about who lived amongst you, who then is there to carry on your memory, to be there for you in life, to be there to remember you in death, and also to be able to care for those who are living, who loved you once you're gone. And that's really powerful because Rabban Gamliel, I just droshed it a little bit, but Rabban Gamliel is really teaching us that by saying, I might have known all of you. I might have been the most powerful, famous, wealthy rabbi you know, but I still came out in the most simple of garments and on a bier, which is not a pine box, but was just kind of like an army stretcher, if you can imagine. And that's because it's not about this moment. It's about how I lived my life and who was there to surround me in life, and not about how I should go out in pomp and circumstance and death. Correct. Rabbi Berenbaum just made a really important point that in Israel, they still bury in just shrouds, covered up and then put into the ground. There's no box. There are certain places where the box is necessary, but for the most part, that is how the halacha works in Israel. We're just going to read this last little piece here, and then we'll do Birkat HaMazon. We're going to do the last two pieces. I'm going to do it very quickly, though. I just thought this was very interesting, that in Gittin, which is a part of the Talmud that is mostly about receiving a get, which is an item for divorce, a divorce document. But it gets brought up that we provide for the Gentiles poor with Israel's poor, and we visit the Gentiles sick with Israel's sick, and we bury the Gentiles dead with Israel's dead due to the ways of peace. Right? Our rabbis are telling us sometimes it's important to put your own people over the others. But at the end of the day, if someone's sick and they're not Jewish, you still visit them. And if someone needs you to bury them and they're not Jewish, you still bury them. And if someone needs money and they're not Jewish, you still give them money. Right? So I think that's also a very interesting way of kind of leveling the playing field here, that sure, there are times in which we elevate those who are our own. Every culture does that. But there are also times for us to recognize that it's important to look beyond ourselves to also help those in need. Okay, this is the last piece that I want to read. This is translated and formatted by Rabbi Evan Leader from Hebrew College. And it's also based off of a piece from Gemara and Masechet Sanhedrin. And I just loved the poetic way that he created this translation, so I wanted to read it. They asked, are eulogies meant to honor the living or to honor the dead? What difference does it make? It matters if a person said, do not eulogize me. Or if the heirs do not want a funeral, can we collect expenses from their heirs? Come listen to my reasoning. Avraham came to eulogize Sarah and to weep over her. If eulogies are to honor the living, they would not delay Sarah's burial just to honor Avraham. Perhaps it pleased Sarah that Avraham be honored for her. Come listen to my reasoning. You will die in peace, and you will be cremated in the furnaces of your ancestors, the early kings who came before you, and you will eulogize, woe our master. That's from Jeremiah. If eulogies are to honor the living, why would he care? What Jeremiah said was, Israel shall be honored through you as it was honored through your ancestors. So the reason I brought these texts today is because I think, I didn't mean for this to be a downer, though of course when we talk about death, it's hard to not keep the room light and fluffy. But what I wanted people to think about is the fact that when we think about death, what happened in this room happens, right? Everything becomes solemn and quiet and sad. And yet, we shouldn't think about it as a party, of course, because that's not how grief feels. But it should be a way for us to remember to surround community with our love. And I think we miss that mark sometimes. I think we miss the mark of recognizing, because it feels awkward to human beings to talk to those who are grieving, we miss the mark to show up for people who are grieving and to say, you know, this is also an important time. I came to your kid's bat mitzvah, and now I'm coming to your mother's shiva. Right? It's a really important thing for us to remember, because one feels very comfortable and very easy and the kiddush is good, and the other one does not feel so comfortable and you don't know what to say, and the food is kiddush cookies and you're not so excited about that. Right? So maybe there is something more that you, that I, that we could be doing to recognize how we can take care of the life cycle of burying our dead, and to remember that it's about bringing that person who has now passed, but also the family who is remembering them, closer into community.